from your local election headquarters, this is the 3rd Congressional District Republican Debate, live from the WOOD TV8 studios.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Republican candidate debate for the 3rd Congressional District. I'm Rick Albin. The 3rd is made up of Calhoun, Berry, Ionia, Kent, and a small portion of Montcalm County, and is currently represented by Congressman Justin Amash. Congressman Amash was first elected as a Republican in 2010, but is no longer a member of the party and has not qualified for the ballot as such. Hillary Schulten is the lone Democrat on the primary ballot and will be her party's nominee in November. 5 Republicans are on the ballot for the 3rd district seat. I will introduce 4 of them in just a moment. Candidate Emily Rafi declined to participate. The 4 other candidates have agreed to a simple set of rules for this debate. I will ask a question, and each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond. Each candidate will have 3 rebuttals. They'll hold up a sign like this. And when all of the other candidates have answered the question, they will be given 30 seconds rebuttal time. There are no opening statements, but each candidate will have 60 seconds at the end for closing remarks. Before we start, a quick note about social distancing. Each candidate is located at a podium at least 6 feet apart. Each candidate was escorted through common areas of our building to their individual holding areas while wearing a mask and staying at least 6 feet apart. The same process was repeated when they were escorted to the studio. With that, let's meet the candidates. Joe Farrington is a small business owner and a trustee for the Village of Lions. Representative Lynn Affendulis is the granddaughter of immigrants and lifelong West Michigander. Peter Meyer is an Iraq War veteran and the grandson of Fred Meyer. Tom Norton is an Afghanistan War veteran and founding board member of West Michigan Veterans focusing on suicide prevention. Our questions were taken verbatim in some cases or by suggestions from you, the listener. The first question goes to Mr. Farrington, decided by a random draw. We've received a number of questions about recent protests and demonstrations regarding racial injustice and the need for societal change. The Black Lives Matter movement has been seen nationwide, including in towns and cities that you seek to represent. What is your response to those protests, and how would you deal with the changes that are being demanded? Mr. Farrington?
Yes, Black Lives Matters. Well, let me tell you this. Voters, Americans, if you feel that the Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement is simply a ploy to bring down, disrupt this country, and that the victims of these prolonged systemic injustices, if you believe that they're just seeking a paycheck, vote for these conservatives. I mean, if you feel that the color of your skin makes you a better person or superior to someone else, effectively a white supremacist, vote for these conservatives. If you choose to ignore the fact that President Trump was a 5-time draft dodger, a 6-time bankrupt businessman, a liar that was justly and lawfully impeached, vote for these conservatives.
Representative Affendulis.
In the 1960s, my father had a restaurant in downtown Grand Rapids. And in 1969, there were race riots in downtown Grand Rapids that effectively shut Grand Rapids down. And my father's business was effectively shut down, and it had been a very popular restaurant until then. We're not going to let that same thing happen again. It took decades to get downtown Grand Rapids back. We're not going to let that happen again. We are not going to let mobs of people decide the future of our community. We're not going to let them ruin the lives of business leaders and business people who have worked so hard to build their businesses and to employ so many people in Grand Rapids and in our communities. We're not going to let them rule. We are a nation of laws and order, and we are going to make sure that we maintain those laws and order. So that our communities can thrive.
Mr. Mark.
You know, I think we were all heartbroken by not only the death of George Floyd, but also by the response we saw in our cities. How you saw a protest that was fighting for change get co-opted, get hijacked, get taken over by arsonists, by vandals, by saboteurs who brought the greatest destruction to downtown Grand Rapids that we've seen since the 1960s. You know, I sat down with a group of African-American community leaders afterwards because I think it's critical that we rebuild the social fabric that's been fraying. It's critical that we have a trust that's built between our police officers and the community that they are entrusted with protecting. I mean, this is something that is not a political issue. You have folks on the left who are trying to drag it, trying to make it partisan, but to me, it's about how can we heal our communities? How can we make sure that prosperity, that opportunity, that the American dream is accessible to all, and that none of our neighbors feel unsafe in their skin?
Mr. Norton.
Black lives matter because all lives matter. At the end of the day, it's not about the color of our skin, but the content of our character. Our nation has moved away from this idea. Out of all the candidates standing here, I'm the only one that actually held a unity rally with the police department in Grand Rapids to make sure that our police officers were funded. None of the other candidates showed up. Johnny Brand showed up, the police chief of Grand Rapids showed up, and it was a very diverse event with diverse speakers. In order to address what is going on in this nation, we need to quit pointing out the differences and understand that it is us that makes the decision on where we go in life. We cannot allow this nation to be torn down. We cannot allow our society to be torn down by what's going on. We need to make sure that we have leaders that stand up and fight for the United States of America every day of the week. Because if we don't do that, we surely will go into the darkness.
The next question will begin with Representative Afendoulis, and I want to stipulate that this is not necessarily a federal issue, but it has to do with some of the questions that have been surrounding this same issue. One of the demands that has arisen has been about defunding police. So asking you, understanding that this would not necessarily fall on your desk as a member of Congress, but in the general state, would you be in favor or opposed to taking some money from police departments and repurposing it for other uses, like social workers and efforts to better serve minority communities?
Thank you for the question. Again, I go back to the experience that we had in West Michigan in the 1960s, and having strong law enforcement is critical. Are those other things critical? Those other programs critical that you mentioned? Absolutely. Can we find areas for to cut that so that we could fund something like that? Absolutely. These are important initiatives, but to defund the police or to take money from law enforcement, I don't think is the answer.
Mr. Meyer?
I strongly oppose defunding the police. 2 weeks ago, I sat down with the police chief down in Battle Creek, Chief Blocker, and he showed me around his operations and how he had down in Battle Creek, he had social services, he had homeless services, he had domestic abuse, he had all manner of other social services within the police department so that they could coordinate, so that they can make sure that a mental health issue is being addressed appropriately, so they can make sure that incidences of marital abuse were addressed appropriately, because the police are the first line of response. You call 911 when you don't know who else to call, and they are being tasked with an impossible charge of trying to be in the middle of essentially every disagreement, every argument, every interaction that folks may have. So I think it's critical that we continue to strongly support our police officers in this mission.
Mr. Norton.
Seattle, Washington, the ambulances couldn't get to a young man because there wasn't enough cops in the area. He ended up dying because the ambulances couldn't arrive. President Trump actually called the father. When you look at defund the police, again, I held a rally to make sure they kept their funding. And it's a big win because the city of Grand Rapids only cut $400,000 and not the $9 million that would have cut 72 officers in Grand Rapids. So for us, it was a big win. When we look at defunding the police, we got to think about the 9 kids that died in Chicago. What about their life? They matter, don't they? The officer today that was suspended because he defended himself when a person approached him with a knife and a screwdriver. His life matters, doesn't it? Los Angeles, 250% increase in homicides. Defund the police, every American is going to be in more danger than they were before. That's why we need to fight for it.
Mr. Parrington.
All right, let's make it clear that defund the police doesn't mean to obliterate the police. What defund the police means is if they're asking for 12 new squad cars and every car on their force is 4 years old, they don't need all those cars. Maybe defunding the police means they only get 2 cars instead of everything that they ask. Now, on the other hand, let's take education for a moment. Betsy DeVos says, we're not going to give you funding unless you send these kids back to class. And there's only, well, a death rate that we're expecting to be about 0.02%, which leads us to about 30,000, 40,000 students that are okay to just wipe off the face of the earth, that apparently it's all right to kill children, but we can't take money away from police. I love my sheriff's department. I love my state troopers. I love my local cops. But at the same time, let's put it in context, because they're misinforming the country, misinforming our 3rd district, and let's be realistic.
Let's move on to our next issue and our next question. And this is something that I know has impacted all of you when it has come to campaigning as well. But the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way many of us live our life from day to day. And this is one of dozens of questions that came in from Jim from Wyoming. And he asks, the president has refused to wear a mask, even though medical experts have encouraged it to prevent the spread of COVID-19 to others. What's your position on the wearing of masks? And you certainly may expand that to the whole COVID-19 response, but that was just one of our listener questions. We'll start with you, Mr. Meyer.
Well, thank you, Rick. And I'll actually push back on that assertion. The president was wearing a mask at Walter Reed Military Hospital, I believe just today or yesterday. And we've seen that there has been, obviously a big shift in the government's approach. For the first couple of weeks and months of the coronavirus pandemic, the CDC was very inconsistent, telling folks not to wear a mask that was ineffective, right? I mean, we saw the challenge with trying to then rebuild that trust as folks have been adopting them. I wear a mask when I go into crowded indoor spaces. I know our governor has continued to press not only the mask use, but to do that in a way that has led to a degree of unaccountability with her unilateral executive actions. We're going on 4 months of no input from the state legislature on how this governor should be responding. And we at a certain point need to recognize that though we're in an emergency, we also need to make sure that our democratic republic is truly represented.
Mr. Norton?
When it comes to masks on there, the president has worn masks twice, also at the Ford manufacturing plant. And he's been a couple other times on there. He even said he looked pretty good in a mask and looked kind of like the Lone Ranger, is what he said today. So he's not completely opposed to the masks. For instance, I can't wear a mask very long inside because, well, I have sand fused in my lungs from Afghanistan. I have veterans I serve with that actually suffer from burn pits that can't breathe when they walk into buildings with masks. But currently, when they walk into a building, they're being persecuted even though they serve this country. Sometimes we need to take a step back and look in the mirror and realize that we have to have the courage in order to move forward as a society. Social distancing, hand sanitization, if you can wear a mask, wear a mask. If you can't, realize that some of these people just can't do it. The fact that our state legislature has completely and utterly failed us is ridiculous. In fact, every state legislator voted yes to give our governor this order in the first place.
Mr. Farrington.
Yes, to praise a president on wearing a mask is like praising my son for making his bed. He's 2 years old. And, well, after the fact of seeing what a great job he did, the truth is this, is that he covered up a mess. He pissed the bed and, well, he tried to hide it. That's pretty much what the president is doing with these masks. He's fumbled the ball. He's weaponized a pandemic, and people are dying. I mean, this shouldn't be a political issue. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. It's about lives. It's about human lives. It's about American lives. And in November, if one of these other candidates are standing up here in November, they're going to be scrambling like rats jumping off a ship to put as much distance between them and Donald Trump. I'm a fiscal conservative, a social moderate. That's what I am. I'm not going to just ride the party wave and say that he's doing great. No. I disagree.
Representative Affandoulis.
Thank you. When COVID first hit, my daughter was a senior in high school, or a senior in college. She had to finish her senior year in our den, which is where I had to set up my office to continue my work. Catherine worked there. My son's welding program got stopped, and I sat in my chair and took call after call after call from hundreds of constituents who were so worried about losing their jobs, losing their, losing their income. It was heartrending, and I think what we all learned in the process, we learned how to work safely and live safely. And then we also saw what overstepping meant. We also saw our governor overstep and create some policies that frankly have been disastrous for the people of state of Michigan. Yes, the legislature gave her emergency powers initially, but we followed the federal government. We followed the president's, we took the president's lead, and we gave her emergency powers for a short period of time. She has overstepped that, and she has trampled on our constitutional rights.
Mr. Norton, next question begins with you, and looking forward, thinking about the coronavirus, what should the continuing response to COVID-19 be from a federal level? And thinking in terms of ultimately finding a vaccine for the disease, Elizabeth in Ionia asks, are you for or against mandatory vaccinations?
I am fully opposed to mandatory vaccination, but here's why. The biggest fundamental to mandatory vaccinations is this. If you actually mandate what somebody can put in their body, what can you not mandate? For instance, Ms. Effendoulis voted for HB 5672. Under subsection 3, employers can take their employees to court to force them to use a microchip so the employer can track them afterwards. So if you can put vaccines in your body, what else can the government and businesses make you put in your body? When I stop and look at this, it's like another Effendoulis taking us to the cleaners.
Mr. Farrington.
Yes, vaccines. I fully support vaccines. As far as COVID-19 vaccine, I'm going to hold off a few years on that, maybe 2021 or 22. It's just not enough science, not enough to back it up as far as effectiveness. Now, Tom touched on a pretty interesting point, which was rights and what people can and cannot do with their bodies. Now, let me say this. If you insist that women, and this is for voters, if you insist that women are not responsible to have equal rights and able to make decisions pertaining to their own bodies, vote for these conservatives. The thing is this, is that there's just far too much regulations and rules, and just is becoming a nanny state. The talking point for the Republican Party was once it should be a moral and individual decision.
Representative Effendoulis.
Thank you. I look forward to the day that there is a vaccine for COVID-19 and support the use of vaccines. And regarding the legislation that Mr. Norton brought up, that actually is legislation to prohibit employers from requiring microchipping of their employees as a condition of employment. It prohibits it. There is a clause in there that is being removed in the Senate. Those of us in the legislature, we worked with the bill sponsor. It's being removed in the Senate, and that is how you make a good bill better.
Mr. Meyer.
My background is in humanitarian.
Peter, I did a rebuttal.
Oh, no, you began the questioning, right?
I began the question.
Right, so he'll answer and then you'll get your rebuttal.
Okay. Sorry.
All right, so restart the time for Mr. Meyer, please.
I began my career in disaster response and humanitarian aid, and I've actually performed vaccinations for refugees in South Sudan and seen folks die of easily preventable diseases. So I am by no means opposed to vaccinations, but I think it's important that we recognize that within our federal system, health powers are traditionally left up to the states to decide. So that's where the decision on vaccination should occur. Now, I think Pfizer just today approved fast-track authority on a coronavirus vaccine, and I think we all pray that it's effective so that we can bring an end to not only this pandemic, but also start to continue to reopen our economy. Because we have seen not only lives lost, but the severe impact this has had on children whose schooling has been interrupted, on our businesses that have had to shut down, on folks who've been out of work. We need to appreciate the fact that this is a virus that has impacted all of us and do everything we can to expedite our way out.
Thank you all. Now, we do have one rebuttal, and Mr. Norton, I apologize. What we will do is when you put up a rebuttal, we'll let everybody else answer the question, and then we'll come back to rebuttal. So thank you very much. So you have 30 seconds to refute something you heard a moment ago.
When Lynn says that this bill didn't do that, it's right in subsection B, 5672. Everybody can go look it up. And the other problem is when she says we're going to let the state Senate fix what we voted for. When you're in the United States Congress, are you going to let Nancy Pelosi pass bills so we can see what's in it and hope the Senate actually fixes the problem that you just passed? That seems ludicrous, and there is no leadership in that.
Moving on to our next subject and our next question, and we're starting with Mr. Farrington this time. While social justice and COVID-19 were the source of a number of viewer questions, there was another, and I will say, I guess it surprised me a little bit after thinking about it, perhaps not, but there was another repeated theme that was in some form dozens of questions, and it was about President Trump. So we've tried to encapsulate some of that into a couple of questions. First, Chris from Grand Rapids wants to know, do you support President Trump? Chris goes on to say unequivocally. I would add why or why not. Mr. Farrington?
All right. Do I support President Trump? The answer is I will not be voting for President Trump. I think that he's a divisive individual. I don't find him to be exactly all that bright. He's braggadocious. He is somewhat of an idiot. He's a reality TV show host, and I mean, the guy is a 5-time draft dodger. If you haven't heard that before, and this is the first time, 5 times he said no to the United States. He's also a 6-time bankrupt businessman. 6 times. He's not good at business. The people that are good at business are the people that he delegates power to. Banks in America, they do not do business with him. So as far as supporting President Trump, if he's still in office, the best way I could support him is, well, I have a 2-year-old, so I know how to change diapers. So I could help him out there.
Representative Affandoulis.
Yes, I support the president, and even more importantly, I think it is critical to be respectful of the office, respectful of each other, to have discourse that we're proud of in our federal government, to talk about the work that we do individually and together with, in a manner that makes us proud to be Americans, that makes us proud on a world stage. President Trump has gotten many, many critical things done. He has checked the box 1, 2, 3, 4. He has done what he said he was going to do, and he's done it in the face of amazing odds, an impeachment process, constant negativity, constant, just a barrage of criticism. I don't know how he continues to do what he does, but he does it and he gets it done, and I do support him.
Mr. Meyer.
Rick, I'm not running to be a rubber stamp. What I am running to do is to end our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've spent 3 years between Iraq and Afghanistan as a combatant with the United States Army and as a conflict analyst for the humanitarian aid community. President Trump is on track to be our first president since Gerald R. Ford, whose 107th birthday would be today, and who was grown up in West Michigan. He's on track to be the first president since Gerald R. Ford who will leave office having ended more wars than he began. The president has stood strong by trying to end our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're going to negotiate a peace. This is why I'm running for office, because that is something that I told deep in my heart, that we need to resolve our conflicts. And with President Trump, that is what I intend to do.
I do support the President of the United States, very, very bluntly and very straightforward. I drove on his convoy in September of 2016. In fact, the President is putting people back to work faster than anybody ever imagined through this COVID crisis. You can watch the left actually break down and melt down. And on this stage, I am the only consistent conservative. The other ones are conservatives of convenience. In fact, Lynn put out something on Facebook that said, Busey walk-in 2016, because if we have to elect bat blank crazy, we might as well make it entertaining. Mr. Meyer served on a board with Hunter Biden called the Truman Project. The Truman Project worked on impeaching the President of the United States. Matter of fact, the question I have for Peter is, where's Hunter?
All right, we've completed, has everybody answered this question? We got all the way through this one? Yeah. And we have a rebuttal? And we actually have 2 rebuttals, right? We'll start with Mr. Farrington, and then we'll go to Mr. Meyer.
I heard a beautiful word, respect, and that's something that I like to treat everybody with, respect and dignity. However, we have a man that, when it came to respecting the presidency, he claimed and held on to his predecessor was from Kenya, the whole birther issue. The pay to play with Betsy DeVos as our school superintendent or secretary. That's not respectful. That's, well, that's the swamp right there. Shut down the economy because he wanted his border wall. The man's constantly unprepared and on his heels. First special ops mission
that's your time, Mr. Farrington.
Thank you.
Mr. Meyer.
Tom, I've never met Hunter Biden. I've never met any Biden. I think that's a challenge when you get your facts from Facebook. But one thing that I can proudly announce tonight is that I've been endorsed by Ambassador Rick Grinnell, who was our former acting director of national intelligence, and also our former ambassador to Germany, one of the president's strongest and proudest defenders.
And one more rebuttal, Mr. Norton.
Peter did in fact serve on the board of the Truman Project. Hunter Biden was on there in the same token. You can say whatever you want, but they were on the board. The Truman Project did work to impeach the President of the United States.
Seeing no more red cards, we'll move on. Looking at more or less the same question from a different standpoint is Jordan from Grand Rapids, who wonders, how as a Republican will you be able to appeal to Democrat voters in the 3rd District? Will you promise to condemn President Trump when he is in the wrong and work with President Biden if he is elected? We'll start first with you, Representative Afandoulis.
Thank you. You know, in the State House, I've had the opportunity to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And it is incumbent upon us to listen and to learn from each other and to be open and empathetic. And I think that's going to be just as critical in Washington as it is in Lansing, perhaps more so. We have to reach across the aisle, and we have to work respectfully with each other. And I believe that is critical in working with, if there were a President Biden, and I certainly don't believe that's going to be the case, but I will work respectfully. I would work respectfully with him, and I certainly look forward to working with President Trump, who I believe is going to win this race.
Mr. Meyer.
In addition to my work in disaster response, humanitarian aid, and the military, I've also spent several years advocating for veteran education policy at the national level. I've testified before Congress. I helped campaign and pass the post 9/11 GI Bill back in 2008. And I know what it takes to pass bipartisan pieces of legislation, especially those that are critical to not only, our present and taking care of veterans, but also to address a lot of the challenges that are facing our country today. I have no issue finding common solution. In fact, that's why I'm running, because I do think that we're not going to agree on everything, and polarization, partisanship, that's a part of politics. I wish it wasn't, but that's something that we can't wish away. But at the end of the day, we're all Americans, and we have a shared destiny that we need to be fighting for. And we can't let, those who seek division and divisiveness and the loudest voices in the room always carry the day.
Mr. Norton.
Again, I held the unity rally with the police. It was very diverse, people from every background. We had Democrats, we had Republicans. On the stage, I actually worked for charitable gaming in the state and worked with teachers' unions in order to make sure it stayed in place so that we could fund school books in poor schools, to make sure that we funded suicide prevention for veterans, which is one of my biggest things of why I decided to run against Justin Amash, because he'd tell veterans, you're not my problem. Go to the VA. That's why I filed before it was popular. The other thing that we have to stop and look at we need to address real fundamental things inside the budget. We need to address insurance reform. We need to address Social Security. They're eating up the entire budget. We need to address where we're going with the entire budget across the board. You look at our actual stimulus checks. There was so much bailout money, it made it disgusting. There's $1 trillion that didn't go to us, but went to pad the pockets of other Democrats.
Mr. Farrington.
Yes, the most unpatriotic, un-American ideology is partisan politics. When they put party politics above the needs of this nation, they do a disservice to this nation. When each of them claim to be the most conservative candidate, they only seek to serve conservatives. I seek to serve all of the 3rd District. And Ms. Afandoulis, I wasn't raised by millionaires or billionaires, Mr. Meyer. I was raised by the working class. That's who I represent, that's who I am. And when it comes to just the pay to play, when it comes to the legalized corruption that is in Washington, that is here as we speak, what chance do we have? I need votes. I need working class votes from the Republicans, from the center, from Democrats. I'm not going to discriminate. You need someone in Washington that represents you, and I'm that guy.
All right, we're going to change the subject for a little bit. We'll start with Mr. Meyer. This question affects all of you in just 3 weeks, but as a practical matter, it affects you right now, because everybody in the state is being offered the ability to get an absentee ballot. And Kimberly from Middleville has a timely question in all of that, and she wants to know what you think about this. I think she has this question for you, so listen to the monitors, please.
What is your stand on the way Michigan handles absentee ballots? If you would change something, what would you change?
So did you hear the question clearly? And we'll start with you, Mr. Meyer.
Well, I voted absentee in the past. When I was deployed overseas and when I was in the military, that was often the only way that I could have my voice heard, and that my fellow service members could have their voices heard as well and participate in the democratic process. But we also have to recognize that in 2018, Michigan dramatically changed its absentee voter laws in ways, some was good, going away from having to have a reason, which prevented some folks, but didn't prevent others. But it also took away the requirement that folks had to show ID before they were registering to vote for the first time and voting absentee. And now I think that is a very critical check that we had, because when we have our Secretary of State sending out absentee ballot applications to just about anybody who can turn them back, we've really opened the door for some fraud to arise. And now we are seeing an explosion in the absentee ballot requests and those that are being sent out. So we really need to make sure that every step is taken to ensure the integrity of our electoral process.
Mr. Norton.
I tried to vote absentee when I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2012, but the Taliban blew up the mailroom, so it's the only election I've actually gotten to miss. Absentee ballot voting, as Peter said, was actually fundamentally changed. We've had a great absentee ballot campaign. We've had people actually working the doors of absentee ballots, actually calling votes and busting their butt and working very hard. I learned hard work when I was raised on the farm, so absentee ballots shouldn't affect or scare a candidate unless that candidate is unwilling to put in the work necessary to actually earn the votes of people. The problem that we have is we got two individuals that have family names and money trying to buy every single vote, and they're wondering how much it's going to cost to get your vote and how for sale it actually is. It's one of the reasons why the background that I was raised on a farm was in order to get that hard work and dedication to move forward.
Mr. Farrington.
I agree with mail-in ballots. It's unfortunate that even though the president, the vice president, and many other high-ranking officials in our government do mail-in ballots, they demonize it, and they claim that it's full of fraud and the integrity can just not stand up to walking in to a polling voting booth. And it's sad to see what's happening in Wisconsin as well as Georgia. It is a miscarriage of justice to allow for, where there should be 30 voting booths, voting precincts, to narrow it down to just one is dirty politics. And I think that having mail-in ballots, it helps. And it's not a matter of being progressive or conservative or liberal. It's a matter of people having a voice. And everybody should have a voice. And everybody should be able to vote without restriction. And unfortunately, that is happening. And that's part of the conversation, part of the debate where there should be no debate.
Representative Avandoulis.
Thank you. Well, I've now heard twice that I was raised by millionaires. My father would be happy to know that that's what people think of him. I was raised very simply. My father was a small businessman and my mother was a teacher. But aside from that, our Secretary of State chose to mail out almost 7 million applications for absentee ballots at the cost of $4.5 million, which was done with CARES money. It was a colossal waste of money, and it is opening, I think, open up our voting for fraud. This has been a disastrous policy and a disastrous practice, I think, and I think we're going to pay for it. I think that absentee ballots are critical in some instances. My mother is infirmed; she must vote absentee. But beyond that, I think that it's important for us to continue the process and the procedure of going to the ballots and going to the booth and showing what it is to be American and to vote.
Mr. Norton, next question is for you, and it turns to an important aspect of the quality of life in Michigan. Sandy from Belmont notes that our state has had ongoing problems with clean drinking water from PFAS contamination in Belmont, and Oscoda to lead in Flint, the lack of water availability in Detroit. So here's what I want to ask you. What will you do to promote safe environments for our citizens and also hold polluters accountable?
We have federal regulations that actually make these things illegal. What we have to do when we have companies blatantly actually contaminating the water, the executive making that decision should actually be prosecuted. Not necessarily the one executing it, because big business will actually use fear as a way to motivate their employees to do the wrong thing. Up there in Belmont, Kevin Green, the Algoma Township Supervisor, he's negotiated a multi-million-dollar system to put drinking water into that area. I'm happy to have his endorsement up there because he is a leader when it comes to actually making sure we have clean drinking water. And that's one of the positive things of my campaign. I don't need people to lead me by the nose to make sure I know what right and wrong is. I have people that actually know how to do the right thing from the beginning.
Mr. Farrington.
Yes, quality of life. I think it has to do with where you are in life, what your position is in this economy, in this society. One of the questions I've heard before was, what's the most important issue to West Michigan? One of the candidates said, the economy. Another candidate said, health care. And as for myself, I said, representation. Representation can make a difference on quality of life, not just for Michigan, not just for a district, but for a country. When you're being represented by billionaires, they have billionaire perspectives. As for myself, last year when it came to economy, well, I lived paycheck to paycheck like many others. As far as health care, I didn't have health care last year because, well, fortunately, from tearing down the ACA, Affordable Health Care Act, well, it jumped up to $900 a month. That's not affordable, so quality of life is representation. And I don't see quality of life when I look to my right here.
Representative Afandoulis.
When I was a child, we would rent a cottage on Lake Michigan for a couple weeks out of the year. I often went to summer camp on the lake. We in Michigan are both the beneficiaries and must be the stewards of one of the most important ecosystems in the world. And I take that very seriously. And when people in this state are suffering from lack of clean water, lack of access to clean water, it is incumbent upon all of us to find solutions to that. It's what I did when PFAS was discovered in my state district. I worked very hard to make sure that that the attention was brought to it at the state level, and that we created solutions. I sponsored a bill to make sure that we had clean drinking water in our schools and in daycares. So absolutely, we must ensure that, especially in Michigan, our people have access to safe water and to the right natural resources.
Mr. Meyer.
Let me be very clear. Clean air and clean water should never be a luxury. These are a necessity and they are a basic expectation that every American should have and that should be fulfilled. I'm proud to have signed on to the American Climate Contract and to work with other conservative environmental leaders like the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus in Congress and the American Conservation Coalition as well to bring market-based approaches to protecting our environment. You know, we in Michigan, we've inherited a wonderful bounty in the Great Lakes. They're central to our identity, they are central to our economy, and they're central to our recreation and the quality of life here in West Michigan. We must do everything we can to continue to protect it, to be looking forward to the future, because our environment is too precious a thing to waste.
Thank you all, and moving on to a question that we begin with you, Mr. Farrington. You actually touched on this a moment ago. For more than 10 years ago, the first incarnation of the Affordable Care Act became law. The question that has been asked in most every debate on a federal level ever since has been one like this from Jim in Grand Rapids. Do you support the repeal of Obamacare, and if so, what is your plan to replace it?
It's all but repealed already. I mean, it's a mockery of a bill at this moment, and at the time, it was a bipartisan bill when it was first introduced. Well, not introduced, but when it was passed. And what is my solution? It's a very simple solution. Let's deprofitize health care. There's three things that should never be privatized. One, education. The other, medicine. And the third, I'd say incarceration. There should never be a profitability outlook on those three issues. So when it comes to healthcare, let's take the incentive of it. And it has nothing to do with, it needs to be competitive or free markets. That's nonsense. And when it comes to free markets, they're not really all that free. When we give a grant for a healthcare industry and then they turn around and sell it back to us for $3,000 for a COVID medicine, a pill, it's outrageous.
Representative Afandoulis.
When my daughter was born 21 years ago, She was born very early and very sick. And I was so blessed and knew every day that I was blessed to be here in the United States of America in a healthcare system that could properly take care of her and that saved her life and mine, frankly. And we may have needs in our healthcare system to adjust it, to fix things, absolutely. But it still is, with its flaws, it still is the best healthcare system in the world. We need to make sure that market-based solutions, that we allow those to happen. We take a look at costs, we take a look at transparency. There are many things that we can look at, but we cannot deny that this is the strongest, best healthcare system in the world.
Mr. Meyer?
The Affordable Care Act was intended to do three things: to expand access to health insurance, to protect pre-existing conditions, and to control costs. It worked on doing two of those things without addressing the cost factor at all, and in fact, we've seen our premiums continue to rise time and again. One of the most consistent issues I've heard from voters throughout the 3rd District is that they're scared on how they're going to be able to continue to afford to pay their health insurance, on what may happen if they face a catastrophic injury and they're bankrupted by their medical bills. So I do not support the ACA. We need to ensure that we have a replacement, however, first before we go on a full repeal. Because right now we need to make sure that our pre-existing conditions are covered first and foremost, and the president is very clear on that. But we also need to be addressing those cost drivers that are leading folks to be paying so much more out of pocket than they were used to, because we can't have a country when we continue to have folks who are being bankrupted by their medical bills and their health care expenses.
Mr. Norton?
Every single time the federal government gets involved in insurance, the price goes up. Every single time government makes a new regulation, the price goes up. Every single time government says we can't purchase insurance across state lines, the price goes up. It's time Republicans step forward with a real plan, and here's one for you. Let's remove the state borders. Let's make it so you can purchase insurance from Florida if you live in Michigan. Let's make it so you can purchase insurance in Ohio and Michigan. Let's make it so you and your neighbors can form a co-op to purchase insurance at the bulk rate, instead of having to go through and play the federal government's loopholes. Let's make it so insurance is handed back to the states with the system making sure they can purchase between state lines as the Constitution actually says we should do. Let's make it so that the doctor-patient relationship is reinstilled and it doesn't go to the big corporations, and it's back to us as working people. Government is in the way.
Mr. Farrington, you asked for 30 seconds from rebuttal.
Yes, I heard that it's a best healthcare system in the world. I disagree with that. When folks have to get online and use social media to pay for healthcare, that's not the best healthcare. When folks have to decide whether or not to pay their mortgage or pay their electric bill or buy some pills to keep them alive, that is not the best healthcare. And replacing it before we end it, well, that would have been a great idea for President Trump when he spent 2 years dismantling it without having a plan.
Thank you all very much. We're going to move on to another topic. If the ACA has been a question in every debate for a federal office for the last 10 years, this question or a question like this has been around for at least 20. It's a constant theme for candidates who will be at least partially in charge of government spending. And here's this question from Terry in Grand Rapids. Would you support a bill that reduces actual spending across the board? I'm going to broaden that out a little bit to include a reduction in overall spending, even if the cuts would not be across the board. Representative Affendoulis.
Yes, thank you. You know, as a mom, I have to sit down and decide what I can afford, what this monthly budget can afford. Sometimes I'm able to do things that I want to do, sometimes I'm not able to do things that I'd like to do, and sometimes I have to save. We all have these kinds of decisions to make on a daily basis in our families. We have to do the same thing at the government level. There are things that we can afford, things that we can, especially in this post-COVID economy, because the COVID solutions are going to be very costly to the United States. I mean, in business, oftentimes we had to make across-the-board cuts. That if the economy was challenged or a market was challenged, we were required to make cuts, and we did it. And what comes out of that is innovation, and what comes out of that is, you know, our new ideas to make things continue in the way that you want them to continue without the previous costs. You can learn how to do more with less, and absolutely, we need to be doing that in government.
Mr. Meyer.
Our national debt is on track to surpass $27 trillion. Within the year, we should be at similar levels of national debt that we have had, or the highest levels that we have had since World War II, which were our highest ever since the American Revolution. This is something that younger generations are inheriting. It's going to drag on our economy and our economic productivity, and it's something that we absolutely need to address. I support innovative fiscal rules like a debt brake so that we are able to begin to rein in that spending looking forward, because right now, so much of our government is operating off of a sense of inertia, right? If you don't spend however much money you're allocated by the end of that fiscal year, you're not going to get even more the next year. We need to get back to a sense of zero-based budgeting. We need to go back to a sense of fiscal constraint. And let's be honest, this is something that our party has not been strong on, but it's an issue that we need to take back.
Mr. Norton.
When you stop and look at candidates and you start seeing how much money pours in from Washington, PACs and special interest groups, and you look at the two major fundraisers in here, you already know nothing's going to be done. If you look at my campaign, I've spent all my own money and enough to actually be competitive in this race. When you fly into Washington and land, you'll almost want to puke by the amount of money stolen from you, your parents, your children over the past 30 years. Government has expanded, skyscrapers everywhere, granite roads in the middle of just inner city streets. They have nothing to do with downtown capitals or trying to inspire anybody. Government wastes money every day of the week. We do need to cut across the board. We need to fold duplicate programs together. We need to reform Social Security. We need to reform Medicaid and Medicare. We need to reform these types of things in order to make sure we're building up. And anybody that tells you that they're not for sale, just follow the donations.
Mr. Farrington, I'm sorry.
I'm very glad to say that I don't have endorsements from special interests. I don't have endorsements from politicians that, well, you give them a little bit of a campaign contributions, they'll be happy to endorse you. As for myself, I am a fiscal conservative. That being said, when it comes to cuts of the budget across the board, it's not so much that we need to cut the budget. What we need to do is raise some taxes. In 2017, we need to repeal that 2017 billionaire corporate tax cut that took $3 trillion out of the economy. It's ridiculous. I own a business. My business is paid for. My kitchen is paid for. The house is paid for. I don't live beyond my means. I live within my means. And the government should act the exact same way. And when I say that, well, I appreciate that you're paying for your own campaign. I do the same. But that being said, I'm not for sale, such as these folks over here. They are begging for campaign donations every day.
We have a rebuttal with Representative Afandoulis.
I do. Thank you so much. And I do not believe we have a taxing problem here in the United States. I don't believe in additional taxes. I believe we have a spending problem. But that said, I want to address the contributions issue. I am so honored to have 16,000 contributors to my campaign. The average donation is something around $30. That tells you a lot about the grassroots efforts and the grassroots nature of my campaign, and it's a campaign that I'm just so honored and delighted to be running, and so honored by all the people who've chosen to contribute to it. And my endorsers are also all from Michigan.
That is your time. And this will be our final question. I'm going to truncate the question because I think we can get 60 seconds for everybody here. We'll start with you, Mr. Meyer. Finally, one viewer wants to know about a large number of men and women in Michigan who are not just Republicans, they're strong union members. I'm going to jump down to the cut to the case, if you will. They want to know, when you go to Washington, if one of you does, what will you do to look out for the folks back at home? Decent working living wages, paid sick time, family leave time, and health care. What will you do for those folks, starting with you, Mr. Meyer?
One of the key things that we need to do is we need to be focusing on those pocketbook costs. You look at those areas, healthcare, housing, education, and how they have dramatically outstripped our inflation in the past few years. And then you overlay that with what are the most highly regulated areas in our economy. It's healthcare, housing, and regulation. We have a government that has intruded in, and in the name of trying to make it more affordable, only driven prices even higher. We need to be getting down to brass tacks. We need to be focusing on the underlying cost drivers, because right now there are folks who are profiting off of the government's dime in all of those sectors when they should be competing on delivering a more quality product, delivering a more affordable product, and delivering a more efficient outcome in general. I mean, this is something that we need to take back from, especially the left, who are looking to subsidize, nationalize, and socialize all of our costs, when the real thing we should be doing is pushing it down to the local level based on limited government, transparency, and a free market.
Mr. Norton.
The first thing that we need to do is protect American jobs. We have to make sure it's America first. NAFTA was one of the worst things possible. It killed the middle class for decades. Republicans, Democrats said it wasn't coming back. Look at what Trump's done. The middle class is growing for the first time in decades. That's what's actually happening. There's no fluff to it. It actually is happening to folks. If we look at it right now, one of the big issues for working class families in Michigan, we have a huge Teamsters organization, a huge truck driver organization, but we allow foreign drivers to come across the border and deliver products as non-U.S. citizens without actual proper driver's licensing. And what we need to do is make sure that those folks aren't coming across. It needs to be American truck drivers first, foremost, and every time when they come across any border. So that's something that we actually have to do. The other thing we need to make sure we do is fair trade deals to protect the American worker.
Mr. Farrington.
I was a union teacher. Also, when GM was shut down, I myself, it was just at the very beginning of the campaign, I took the opportunity to go down, let the gentlemen and women know of the UAW know that they have representation even on the Republican Party. The Republican Party of which, well, is very proud of not only Citizens United, but also very proud of, what was that? Where the right to work law. That thing is a joke. It's set up to dismantle unions, to weaken the workers. As for myself as a business owner, well, it works out well for me. However, it tears families apart. It tears jobs apart. It tears cost of living as well as pay increases apart. So when it comes to representation, I've been a union member. I support the union, and we need representation in Washington.
Representative Afendoulis.
My daughter is going to become a teacher, and my son is going to become a welder. And those very things, health care and leave and all those things, are going to be as important to them as they have been to me. And so I will fight for those things. I want my children to have a nice, respectable, profitable life and based on their hard work and their initiative. And we, as Republicans, are the party of creating jobs, and that's what we'll be focused on, and that's what I will be focused on, creating a healthy economy and a job-friendly economy, and that will, I think, go a long way toward bridging that gap between the unions and the Republican Party.
Candidates, thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you all for responding to the questions. I appreciate your cooperation. As the rules of the debate stipulate, we now go to a 60-second closing. As I told you in the run-up to this, I'll ask you to be very precise on time because we have a very solid time that this program will end, whether I'm still talking or not. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Mr. Farrington, we'll start with you, 60 seconds.
Thank you very much. When it comes to representation, I represent all the 3rd District. When it comes to LGBTQ community, I support you. In regards to these other candidates, they may view that you should be denied marital rights. You should be denied spousal benefits. I disagree with that. I disagree with much of which these other candidates represent. And the reason that is because I'm a social moderate. I'm a fiscal conservative. But when it comes to what people do in their homes, when it comes to what people do in their bedrooms, it's their business, as long as it's not hurting anybody else. I'm not seeking to put regulations on everybody, but at the same time, I think that we do have an issue with government. I think that we have an issue with, well, like I said, Citizens United, where it's legalized corruption, and all of them are guilty of it. And if that's what you want, vote for these conservatives, because I will not be.
Representative Afendoulis.
Thank you. I'm a mom. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I am the grandchild of legal immigrants who came to this country seeking the American dream. They built their churches and their businesses and worked so hard, and they sent their sons to war, and they loved this country, and they loved being Americans. And I want to give my children the same America that my grandparents came here for. And that's what I'll be doing when I go to Washington. I'll be fighting for the very fabric of this nation, because it is a beautiful nation, and it's the greatest nation in the world. And I want to go there for a couple of terms. I believe in term limits. I don't need a career. I've had a good long career. I want to take what I learned in the career and the skills that I've gotten, and I want to put them to work for the people of the 3rd Congressional District for a couple of terms, and then let somebody come in behind me after that. And I would be honored to earn your vote.
Mr. Meyer.
I hope to earn your vote, not based on anything but the fact that I am here to offer solutions to some of the most pressing problems that we're facing. I'm a conservative because limited government, economic freedom, individual liberty, these principles are what has made our country a superpower. It's what we can do to make sure that from now on, it's not democratic solutions that are on the table, because those are only going to cause more problems at the federal level. We need to be ensuring that we are addressing the underlying challenges. I've fought for our veterans. I've campaigned for veteran education so that they have a degree of upward social mobility that our post-World War II generation had as well. I want to go to Washington to fight for West Michigan so we have strong, stable, and effective representation. And that is why I want to earn your vote tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Norton.
My name's Tom Norton. I filed for Congress because Justin Amash would tell our veterans, "You're not my problem, go to the VA." After he tweeted to impeach the president, everybody else up here decided that they had the courage to run against him. So you already know you're going to get screwed. I'm the only one up here that was raised on a farm. I've baled hay. I've built buildings. I've worked on cars, changed transmissions and brakes. I have struggled to pay bills. But the American dream, the ability of government being out of my way, has given me the ability to be able to run for the United States Congress. It is up to us that make sure our children have a brighter future, to make sure that our grandchildren have a brighter future. The American dream is not a house or a car. It's the fact that our families can propel themselves further. That is what has been missing from everybody running for Congress. If your vote means so little that it can be bought by a commercial, then just vote that way. And one other thing you'll notice, I'm the only candidate standing on here with an American flag lapel, and that just disgusts me.
Candidates, I thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate the difficulty of running for office in any event, but in this particular difficult time, I know that campaigning has been much different. Having the ability to have you here to talk to voters throughout the 3rd District tonight has been a service that we have been happy to provide, and I appreciate you participating in that. I would also like to thank the best production team in the business for putting our studio into shape for a debate once again on very short notice. And I want to thank you for watching and encourage you to remember that the primary election is August 4th. We don't care how you vote. We just want you to vote. Good night.